Yeah, we've been talking about solving in the quadratics unit. Let's go back and kind of just take a look at this. So even though you already know this one, let's talk about what happens when you have an nth root and you're solving for x. So first of all, if n is odd, you're going to have one real root. Let me show you what I mean by that. So let's just use cube root of 8 as our example. The cube root of 8 is 2 because 8 could be broken into 2 times 2 times 2. So since this is a cube root, I'm looking for something that happens in a group of 3. So the answer is 2. 2 is one real root. In fact, positive 2 is the actual answer. But positive 2 is a real number. But let's think about what happens if I had the cube root of negative 8. When we had even roots, for instance, this was an even number, we would have imaginaries. But that's not going to be the case in odd roots, because if you think about odd, this could be negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. So I could have a group of 3 negative 2's, which would put a negative 2 in the front. So this could be 2 if it's a positive number under here, but if it was a negative number under here, my answer is going to be negative. So I only get one real root whenever it's odd. Let's think about, so this would be a question that would look something like this. Let's say I had x cubed equals 64. To undo the cube, I'm going to cube root both sides. So I would say x equals, and typically on the even roots, I would say plus or minus. But when it's odd, you're not going to have plus or minus. You're going to have one or the other. So the thing that you multiply 3 times to get 64 is 4. And in fact, this time it's positive. So when you're solving for roots, and this is an odd number, you will not have plus or minus like you do with evens. Let's do the even example. And I'll show you what I mean, and you can kind of compare. So if this is even, so let's say I had x to the 4th equals 16. And let's do x to the 4th equals negative 16. And let's do x to the 4th equals 0. We'll talk about all three of those options. So here, to undo a 4th power, I'm going to do the 4th root of both sides. Now, if we think about this, the 4th root of 16, that could be positive 2 times positive 2 times positive 2 times positive 2. Or it could be that I have the 4th root of negative 2, negative 2, negative 2, negative 2. 4 negatives would make a positive. 4 positives would make it a positive. So in this particular case, what could go underneath here could be positive or negative 2. So see how I get two real solutions this time. The positive and the negative. What happens if it's a negative 16 here? I'm going to do the 4th root of both sides. So I have x equals, and we know that if this is even, I have to have plus or minus. And then 16, you can't ever get a negative because these either have to all be positive or all be negative. So in this particular case, we would get 2i. So we have two imaginary solutions. That's because this is an even number. What about if it's 0? What's the 4th root of 0? X would have to be 0. So we could have one real. So when it's even, we could have one real solution and it be 0. We could have two imaginary solutions, or we could have two real solutions. And that's whenever you have an even power. Let's do a few examples. So here's my first example. 5y to the 4th equals 80. So I'm already kind of thinking in my head, I'm noticing that this is an even power. So that means I'm going to have to do plus or minus on this problem. So I'm going to start by dividing both sides by 5. So I get y to the fourth equals 16. And now in order to solve, I'm going to have the fourth root of both sides. I'm going to grab my red pen. So here I'm going to take the fourth root of both sides. And because 4 is an even integer, I'm going to have y equals plus or minus. And then the fourth root of 16 is 2, because it's 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. And you'll start to get some of those memorized. Let's do this one. 2x to the fourth equals negative 162. So I'm going to start off by dividing both sides by 2. So I get x to the fourth equals negative 81. Okay, on this one I know I'm going to have plus or minus because it's even. So I'm going to start off by taking the fourth root of both sides. So on the left side I get x, and on the right side I'm going to have plus or minus something. Now, because this is a negative and this is even, I know that something is going to have to be imaginary. So I'm going to have an I. And then I have to think, what do I take times itself 3 times to get 81? And that answer is 3. And again, you can use your calculator to find those.